Hey, I'm Andrew Dobie.
And I'm Lewis Phillips.
Welcome to episode 12 of Just a Chat With, a video podcast series where we talk about branding and creativity with the world's best in class. Last month, we sat down with James White, aka Signal Noise, at our brand new Made Brave studio in Glasgow. Go have a listen to that one if you haven't already. Before that, we had design legend Michael Wolff on the show. We've recently had Gavin Strange from Aardman Animations, as well as brand legend Martin Neumeier, Noah Klokek from Pixar, and Jack Rennick from Jack Rennick Studio. Today we're here with James Greenfield, who is the creative director and founder of branding agency Koto, which is in its 5th year, has offices here in London, Berlin, and Los Angeles. James has 18 years of experience in the industry, working with brands such as Skyscanner, Fanta, Venmo, Airbnb, and many, many more. James is also a global speaker and a frequent writer on branding for the Creative Review magazine. James, thanks for having us.
No problem. Thanks for asking me.
Cool. So I suppose, we always like to start off, we've described you, but it's kind of interesting to hear people, how they talk about what they do and kind of describe yourself, if that's okay.
Wow, how do you describe yourself? I think as a kind of leader of a lot of very talented and interesting people, trying to help companies in the world stand out and try and find something that's unique about themselves. I think branding is an interesting topic to talk to, because if you talk to the person in the street, you inevitably end on logos, and you never want to move away from the fact that a great logo is an important thing as a signifier, but obviously it's also much more than that. But we're also writing it and changing it. So I think, as a way of describing myself, I think mainly trying to make sure that the connection between the team that works at Koto across our 3 studios and the people that kind of reach out to work with us works in the most successful way possible. So that's a pretty multifaceted role.
Yeah. So you've had a pretty meteoric rise for Koto. Do you want to talk us through kind of that journey and I suppose where you started in design and how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think for me, when you talk to your family and parents, they have probably a clearer reflection about what you were like as a child versus what you remember. And, for me, I've never had the greatest memory, so I can't remember it. But my dad, when he was around, used to tell a story that he could remember me in my teenage years, always talking about starting a creative company and it always being an ambition. I can't really remember that far back, and I can't really remember that being a thing. But he
How old are you now?
I'm 41 now, 41. And he assured me that that was something that I had talked about. But I think in my 20s, I had started to think that I would want to one day have a company, and had spent a lot of time working for some other amazing people, and I was very lucky to work with some very good companies, and had always thought, if I was going to do this, how would I do it, etc., etc. I'm not really a shrinking violet. I'm always been one of the louder people in the room, so therefore I think it always suited my personality as well for me to think that. But when it came to actually starting a company, it took me quite a while to get there, because I was doing some really good stuff. So I was lucky enough to work at companies like Man vs. Machine and Design Studio, and, great projects come in, you get sucked into those projects and you really enjoy what you're doing. And I've always been lucky to do a bit of travel as well. And so you think, of all the people in the world, I'm pretty lucky. I get to go to places around the world, work on really interesting stuff. Yeah, it's hard work. Sometimes I've had to, put the hours in to get the results, but it's been always good. But I think what really spurred Koto to exist was that I'd done with various people I'd worked with some great projects, but I'd started to see this change that was required. And I think the change was about how companies were changing. I think it had gone from this world where there was probably a few big brands that we all interacted with, that we, and some of them we loved and some of them we didn't. And there was some stuff around the edges. And, if people were into certain youth cultures, there was, for me, when I was growing up, Burton Snowboards was always something I just thought was amazing as a brand. And, living in a slightly quiet corner of England, the idea of going to Canada and going snowboarding would have been absolutely incredible. But instead, I was lucky if I got a week in the Alps. But, it's this brand that was amazing to me. But beyond that, there wasn't a lot of other amazing brands. And I think as the kind of 2000s went through, and then the beginning of the 2010s, that was really changing. And so we started the company based upon this idea that if companies are changing and the way that you start companies and how they exist in the world is, then branding needs to change. And I didn't really feel like branding was changing. I felt like, there's been some amazing companies, a lot of them which I'm lucky enough to have kind of come out from the UK, and so therefore I've been closely either worked for them or been influenced by them, had a process that they were never really standing back from and going, why do we do it like this? You know, and it was always because at some point in your career, you've gone to work somewhere and it's like, we do a discovery phase, then we do a strategic phase, then we do this. And I'm not going to claim that we've revolutionized that or changed it particularly, but it's more that actually the way that you work with people and the output you have needs to be about that. And I think the other thing I also found as well was that, you know, the designers that we all looked up to or lionized or thought were amazing were the ones who probably had a bit more of a style, and, you know, and people bought into that style, and you know, there was that world, and they were probably working on smaller projects and were probably a bit more kind of like, I guess, I never like this phrase, but the rock stars, if you like. And then you had the other side, which was, you know, if you're a big company, you need a corporate identity company to do your rebrand, and you need it to be kind of done a certain way, and it needs to be like super professional and slick, and, you know, beautiful moments in those projects, but there was nothing in between. There was these two worlds. You're either big, do big projects, creativity suffers a bit because it's a system and it's got to work through, or you're small and it's amazing and the details are awesome, but you're never going to get to work on the big stuff. And to me, that just felt like a really crazy status quo, where it's like, well, where's the middle? What, you know, why can't we have the craft of those smaller people that I grew up loving versus those big jobs which have real impact? And so that was essentially our proposal, was let's do a third way. It's probably going to be a bit harder because we're going to have to put a bit more effort in. We'll have to convince some people that we're the right people to do it. And we'll probably have to think about getting people into the team that are willing to also accept that challenge and think about the way that's done that. So starting Koto was very much about that, right down to the name, which comes from an article I was reading in the Japan Times. And just to be clear, I'm not a regular Japan Times reader. It just popped up on my social feed one day. I can't even remember who shared it. But anyway, it was with Kenya Hara, the really well-regarded Japanese designer. And in it, he talked about the importance of Koto, as he called it, in the 20th century. And that idea of Koto was this idea of something needing much more than just being like a single plane. It doesn't need to just look good. It needs to be the experience of it as well. And that really resonated with me. And it's, as a classic thing in life, someone's always said it better than you. And I was like, well, that's good.
I know you sometimes hear amazing quotes online. You're like, damn, why can't I phrase things in those ways?
That's what I think. Why is so you know, and in that way, it was also 4 letters long, which is great, and no one else has called it, so it really worked. But yeah, so I think in that that's what our kind of starting thought was, and that's why we kind of came to doing it. You know, for me personally, I come to the end of being a creative director for a reasonable amount of time by then, and knew that I needed another challenge as well to add into the mix.
Cool. So you had like this kind of almost like vision and new proposition. In the early days of Koto, did you find it easy to explain, and how did you find people like kind of reacted to it?
I think one of the good things about waiting a little bit longer to start a company was that I think, me personally, I probably found it a bit easier when we first started, because I think I'd been so used to explaining other companies' propositions, both when I'd been at, like, all the way back to when I used to work at a company called Proud Creative, Members Machine, Design Studio. In all those situations, I've done a lot of new business meetings, a lot of kind of like exploratory stuff with potential clients. And so in a way, you kind of flex that muscle so much that it's not so hard. But what I also did is I also had something to react against to, which was my own way of doing it, or our own way of doing it. So at first, none of the challenge was explaining the proposition, you know, and we've been quite lucky. It's always resonated on that front. The challenge was convincing people that didn't have a portfolio. That was the real challenge, which was like, you know, so who have you done this for? Well, no one actually, because we've only been going for like a month and a half. You know, and I'm sure you guys felt that when you started your agency. Yeah. That is the hill that you have to climb up at the beginning. But I think if you've got your story sharpened, then that's a whole lot easier as well.
Yeah. And I suppose in that first year, often creative people, you know, us being some, can sometimes struggle with all the business side, the challenges of actually setting up a business, running a business, structuring that, and building that kind of robust engine underneath the creativity. Was that something that came naturally to you? You know, is that something you've got in a co-founder, or how did you approach that challenge?
So we've got 2 co-founders, Joey, who's creative director, who now lives in LA and runs our LA studio, and Caroline, who's managing director. So there's definitely sharing that is massively key, and I can't imagine starting a studio on my own. I think that would be probably overwhelming at times. The other component to it was removing my own ego from the process. So I've never really felt compelled to go down the model of like being the person that has the idea and then a team execute it. And I think for a lot of creatives, they have, and there's no criticism in this, but they have this itch they need to scratch, which is like, I need to do this. The reason I want my own agency is I want to be released from, you know, the shackles of working for someone else, or, you know, and kind of do things my own way. That wasn't ever really my driving force in it. So therefore, I think in that way, me spending like a whole day working on the business side of things, it didn't feel like I was getting torn away from the creative side of things, because I ultimately see it as part of the same thing. And so in that way, I think I'm kind of lucky on that front, which is, you know, I don't ever imagine doing a portfolio for James Greenfield ever again. I can't. Yeah. I don't have that need within me, you know. And so therefore, on that front, I think it has given me the mental space to be able to do the business side of things, understand the sales process, team structure, spend time on, you know, working with team development and all that kind of stuff, which you have to do to be successful. But there is also no book on how to do it, so you have to learn along the way. And there is actually a really interesting thing as an industry. I think we do have scant resources when it comes to development of kind of creative people. And I'm not saying creative people are unique, but there is a different process to any other business book you can buy, which is, you know, a bit more of a kind of binary process of like, this is the right way of doing things. You need to do this, you need to do that. Whereas we're essentially dealing with chaos. And if you stop the chaos, the creativity goes. And so it's accepted chaos. So it's pretty,
nice way to put it.
it's pretty challenging, that kind of chaotic part. I think that's why a lot of people get tired of being agency owners as well, because it is so chaotic.
It's not tiring at all. Not tiring at all.
Yeah,
Can we just go to sleep here for the next 5 minutes?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like you kind of run Koto in a very like quite a flat, collaborative, democratized way. You know, you mentioned that you don't really hero individuals. How do you foster like that kind of culture? Because I suppose like creatives are sometimes precious, and a big part of being a creative is ego and subjectivity.
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not going to claim we're perfect and there isn't like any ego or anything like that, because that's just folly. But I think what we're trying to do here is really imbue the idea, and this is, the team would be definitely bored of hearing this, which is no piece of design can ever be greater by one person than a team, because a team will always bring something else to it. Now, that's not saying design by committee, but it's about understanding that if one person's come up with like an approach or like an idea or something, adding someone else's thoughts into that will always like turbocharge it, drive it into that next thing. And so I think if you have that as the North Star of the thing that you think, that's what we want to do, we want to make sure this is a team effort and think about it, then we all come around to it in the end. It might be a bit rocky across the way, there might be disagreements, etc. We don't really argue as a studio. I've worked in studios where people have shouted at each other. We're not really that vibe, but you know, there is passion around that. I think for me as well, it's also about knowing when it is democratic versus when it's not. There is no doubt there are moments where this is a benevolent dictatorship, and that, you know, I'm always really clear about that as well, because ultimately we have to keep velocity. You know, no one comes to us with unlimited money, unlimited time. Everyone comes to us with limited budget, limited time, and they've always maybe sat on their hands a little bit on the time front, so we're always chasing our tails a little bit. But you know, the world doesn't stand still. So I think on that front, we have to accept that, and the only way to get through that limited time, limited budget thing is do it together and try and kind of think about the process and how you can reinvent it, which bits can you tailor, which bits can you edit, etc., etc. Try and avoid it become a formula as well, because I think that's another thing that you can fall into, which is like, well, we've got the formula cracked now, look at all that great work that's done, like, let's kind of push it even further, and you know,
it's not a product business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, person X can do that and person Y can do that, whereas actually if you mix it up all the time, then you're going to keep on getting that space around it.
So Lewis and I are big believers in kind of values-driven business and sort of values and purpose-driven business. And we, you know, in our agencies, we've integrated and sort of, I suppose, built out our brands from the inside out in terms of having those strong values to guide us. It seems from reading the content on Koto and kind of reading your story that you also have a similar viewpoint. I'm interested just to understand how much or importance you feel values and purpose sort of live and brand in today's world.
So I think, you know, there's been some big business leaders recently that have come out, have started talking about purpose. You know, companies that have previously only cared about profit are suddenly talking about ecological components, you know, investing strategies for large investment firms, you know, things like fossil fuels, etc. I think that is a wind of change, which talks to something that maybe us in the softer world have been talking about for a long time, which is create a purpose, create collectivity around it, create that idea of belonging. You'll go further. You'll have greater results and stuff. I think traditionally our industry has maybe treated people as human capital a little bit, and there's a lot of designers out there, and we're lucky enough to come from a country which has a broadly great design education, and so there is a lot of very talented people coming out every year, and I think it can be easy to just take that for granted. And so I think in working for Koto or creating Koto, I wanted to be clear about the idea that this is a values-driven business. We do look after the team. We understand that, there's one side to it which is it is just the right thing to do, and I can go to bed every night and know that I've done the right thing on that front. The second side of it is, I think from a business point of view, it makes complete sense for us to have low staff turnover. We've been going 5 years and only 3 people have ever left Koto, and it's so kind of makes such more stability around what we're doing and the way that we're working together, because we constantly tweak it, constantly change, constantly listening to people. It's not a case of writing a flashy purpose phrase, sticking it on the wall and going, don't forget that's what we're all doing. It's more that kind of soft touch day in, day out, kind of making sure that people collectively build around that. I'm not about to spot test people on what the Koto values are. I'm sure half of them wouldn't even be able to tell you, but it's more about like understanding how you imbue those values into people and think about that. I think it's a very surprising business in the 2020s that's in creativity that doesn't understand that purpose has to be at the core of what we do. Yep. Our biggest job now is advocating that to our clients that we work with to understand how it fits into their businesses as well. Because some of them do very practical stuff, and purpose-driven is working if you are making manifest change to the world. But if you're delivering something that's been the same for the last 50 years, how does purpose pass the bullshit test? It's quite challenging.
Yeah. Have you? It'd be good to talk about like some of the milestones so far of Koto, which is now 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess. So yeah, started it 5 years ago, which is in a way doesn't feel like long, but also I can't remember what it felt like to not do it. So, I'm sure you guys feel similar. I think for me, the milestones there's some really interesting ones. I think you got physical space. So we started off sharing with some illustrators and designers we knew, and it was freezing in the winter. And at the time, Joey and I were living together, and our internet was so bad in there that if we wanted to do image reference searching, we had to go home on the train, do a Google image search, download everything to take it back to the studio to then use it.
Sounds easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're just, after a while, you're like, right, this is not really working. But we're only there for a little while, and then we got our first space. And so I think I think through all those spaces that we've been, and chapters, amazing stuff like the first time I went to the Berlin studio and I hadn't chosen the space. I hadn't really been there before and stuff, and you walk in there and it's lovely and you think, well, this is great. Or, the first time that we opened our LA studio as well, you're like, this is crazy. You're in Culver City where all the movie studios are, and and you can't help but be in LA without that kind of slight Hollywood thing. And you're like, right, there's some idiots from UK here doing some branding in the corner. Don't worry about us. So there's all that stuff. I think there's the client kind of component. So I remember there's a guy called James who used to work at Coca-Cola who became a bit of an advocate for us there. And the day that he rang up and told us that he wanted us to pitch for the Fanta rebrand was a pretty big thing. There's
a nice one.
Yeah, there's like 4 or 5 of us at that moment in time, and we were working quite hard because we were trying to build something, and then suddenly you've got a pitch to rebrand Fanta. And Joey and I just by chance had gone to New Zealand for a job that we'd been commissioned to go over there, and so we were working in New Zealand during the day, and then in the evening we were working on the pitch for Fanta in this Airbnb that the host had failed to note didn't have any heating, and it was winter in New Zealand at the time, so that was seems to be like a heating theme going on here. And then like things like certain American companies we've worked with, brands that we've worked with over there that have, that you find yourself getting the call, the email, doing the work, seeing it out in the world and stuff like that. So I think for me, all of those are the landmarks which really stand up. But then there's other different landmarks, like a couple of years ago, the whole team went to Ibiza for a summer party, and you look out and there's like 2 boats and everyone's on the 2 boats, and you're like, wow, this worked.
What have I done?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who's buying the drinks? Yeah. No. So yeah, so there's those kind of landmark moments that really stick out on that front. But for me, I think I've got this absolute maniacal thing, which I always want the work to be better. And so for me, it's when the work comes out. They're the things that I always, and then go on the internet and then everyone's really horrible about it. So never read the comments.
Yeah, the internet can be a dark place.
Yeah, exactly.
Only read the positivity.
Yeah, well.
Jumping back to Fanta, for some of the younger viewers, listeners, I remember being young at one point, a long time ago. But like when you hear of people rebranding Fanta and that kind of project when you're a young designer, you feel like you can never get there. And I suppose if you're okay to talk about it, can you kind of talk a little bit about how that came about and kind of what that process looked like for you, and kind of just shine a little bit of a light on how how long do these projects run out for you and kind of what's involved?
Because that was early days, wasn't it?
That was in like year one, which is quite crazy, really. So basically, when we first started, I'd kind of activated the network, if you call it that, which is like just talk to everybody, gone to see loads of people I'd used to work with, trying to like connect stuff. And we were really lucky. We got some bits early on, which were really good projects. And, one of the first things we did was for a company called Super High, which does really cool online stuff. And, we did their identity quite quick and they were in a hurry as well. But it's still one of those pieces of work that I'm really happy with and I really like it. But off the back of that, there was someone that I'd just been friendly with on Twitter, another designer we've been talking to, and he'd been working with Coca-Cola on a lot of stuff and still does. And they'd been working on this emoji project where they were attempting to make some emojis for Coca-Cola. And my understanding at the time was that they kind of been a few rounds round and nothing had really resonated and they were doing it. And Matt had just said, you should try Koto. They're new, they'll probably do something good on it. And so we got given this emoji project and we did like a few rounds and it went really well and they really liked the work, and it's apparently on cans all over Asia and stuff these days. But that's one of those things where we did it and we were like, it made the asset, delivered it, and then like a year later I was walking through London, there was a billboard with this thing that said like the London Happiness Index and our emojis were all floating around it and stuff. So that's one of those things. Anyway, having done that, Coke then said like, we've got some other stuff we'd love you to look at. And so we thought, okay, yeah, cool. And you think, well, it's probably going to be similar scale, kind of like smaller, like stuff that might be part of something. And then you get a phone call on a Friday, and I was working late on a Friday in our old studio, and it's James who rings up and goes, yeah, I think I'm going to add you to the pitch list for Fanta. And you're a bit like, whoa, right, what, Fanta? And so,
Fanta.
Yeah, that Fanta. Oh, yeah, that, that really big orange drink. And so we were like, well, obviously we'd love to do that. So we got added to the pitch list. Didn't really know how many other people were pitching or anything about it. I seem to remember, and it's quite a while ago now, so it's hard to really, it's probably all a bit kind of like blurred. But we had like a week or two just to do some ideas. And so ourselves, and then also we got some friends who we'd worked with previously to kind of gave them some freelance money and said, look, we just need like an ideas blast here. Yeah. And we just smashed through like a week or two of ideas, built it out into this deck, presented it to them. And a part of me at that time thought, we're just going to create some ideas that maybe someone bigger is going to execute. And we're just there to kind of maybe be like a bit of a kind of like disruptor that's going to, kind of throw some stuff out there. And at the time, I can't remember how much we got paid for it, but I remember it was like, compared to everything else we'd done, we were like, that's absolutely amazing amount of money. And we were, we both, Joey and I, who were designing back then, had both kind of like dropped our wages massively to start this thing. And so it was very much, soup from Tesco and
eat
stuff.
Again.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so on that front, we just did those. And you think, well, where's that going to go? Anyway, we won it. And then, so the first stage of work was like 6 months. And there was a 3D bottle that had been created by another company. We got sent some of those. Funny story about that was we got sent this top secret bottle and someone stuck it in the recycling. So they just thought it was like an empty drinks bottle. It's like, God, let's probably have that out, the recycling. And then the first stage was very much trying loads of different things. And we did loads of rounds of like stuff that was a little bit more revolutionary, stuff that was a bit more handmade, etc. And off the back of that, we had like a number of routes on the table. We then went to Atlanta and did a workshop with people from around the world that have various job titles like head of sparkling and stuff like that, which I'm kind of envious as a job title, and got them to kind of go through this really laborious workshop process for 2 days to understand what it stood for. Yeah. Came out the back of that, and then the rest of it was kind of like 18 months, and we touched everything from what it looks like on the fountains in McDonald's versus we realised how many flavours there were, and that was quite full on, and at that point you go, God, why did we decide to make this out of paper? Because suddenly you're like trying to make a guana which looks a bit like an eyeball and is a Brazilian thing out of paper, and then you're getting loads of feedback about like it doesn't look very guana like, and I'm like, yeah, I appreciate that, but I've never seen one, so I'm trying to like learn what a guana is at the same time. And so we just ended up doing it, and for ages, and then we were really lucky. We worked with Colophon to make a typeface for Fanta, which you kind of see used globally now. And the thing that's amazing about Fanta is that obviously it's massive, it's a global brand, and sometimes one of the team will have a bit of a Google or whatever, and there was this thing in Switzerland recently where they turned our brand into all these massive inflatables, and it's all printed on everything, and the font that you've done is on like surfboards and all this stuff, and you're like, right, blimey, that's like... It's
always the best bit, isn't it, seeing it out in the wild?
Yeah, totally. Or it drives past you at Halloween with a bus with the font you designed all on it and stuff like that. So it's about 2 years' work, and for us it was really good because it was a really nice big piece of work, which meant that from a financial point of view we had something that we could do, but also from a team point of view, people when they kind of joining us, because at that point we started hiring people, they had something really exciting to start with, and so I think it really set the tone of the company early on. But in terms of how you get jobs like that, like biggest thing I've learned in the last 10, 15 years is that new business is the most kind of organic, crazy thing in the world. One person you met once remembers you somehow and sends an email to person X and says you should talk to these people, and you're always a bit like, wow, right, okay. And I think there's a lot of agencies out there that probably spend tons of time and money on new business people and prospectors and all that kind of stuff. It's that chaos thing again. It's just not like that.
Yeah.
And so
sometimes like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you've met someone for that brief second and it comes back, isn't it?
Or another designer recommends you all the time, which happens way more than I ever thought would happen.
Yeah.
So
You've got the Fanta can behind there. Do you want to show it to just people watching?
One of many. That's an Israeli one, I think, that one. And then my favourites are the ones from the Far East, which are frankly bonkers. But yeah, there's something quite nice.
Very sparkling.
Went to Japan recently, and there's just like some...
Yeah, we don't seem to have a huge amount of Fanta flavours here, do we? We get the short straw over here.
Definitely. There's other bits of the world that absolutely love it.
Yeah, when you go to Spain, there's like 100 on the shelf.
I think it suits the hot weather down there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, totally. So, do you think Fanta was the kind of catalyst for a lot of the growth in that early?
It was the thing was, because we didn't get to talk about it for ages.
Yeah.
It kind of wasn't, because we were doing it, but we couldn't talk about it, and it took a long while for it to come out. We got the Gumtree rebrand quite early on as well, which was, is a surprisingly big brand. I think a lot of people, it's Gumtree something they think of and they've used and stuff, but when we worked with them, we looked at their user numbers and they're absolutely massive. It's like top 20 website in the UK at that time when we rebranded them. So, a massive amount of traffic. And so that was a really key one for us, because in winning that, which we won at pitch, and then doing it, we had a case study that we could go to people and go, we've done this, it proves the process, it talks about stuff like that. So in a way, that was actually bigger than Fanta.
So I suppose running an agency now, you mentioned earlier you always kind of thought you would run a creative studio at some point. Did you always feel creative as a child?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, again, it's like your memory tricks you a bit. I don't think I was the classic kid that was always drawing. I think I've listened to plenty of podcasts, seen plenty of talks where the person tells the story of like, from 3 years old I had a pencil and I never put it down, so I always knew I'd do that kind of stuff. I think I was always interested in stuff. I was always interested in like 3D stuff, the way things existed, the way things worked. I'm a reasonably practical person, so I think I was interested in like mechanical sides of things and stuff like that. But I think at the school I went to, it was very academically focused, and as an undiagnosed dyslexic at that time, I always found, I don't know, a bit of me probably just gave up trying to match those that were kind of like, heading for wherever. And so for me, I've kind of was always interested in the alternative stuff. I also grew up in quite a rural place in the 1990s where the world was a bit suffocating, but I wasn't a million miles away from London, and so you knew something was happening. And so it was, back in those days, things like the Face magazine, which would be in my local news agency. It'd be stuff like that would always catch my attention, and I'd be like, that's interesting, what's that about, And so for me, I think it was exposure to that, and then subsequently after that, in my teenage years, just massively obsessed with music. Now, literally the worst singer in the history of the world, have no musical ability in my life, and so a way to be connected to music was visual identity stuff. And so very interested in like record sleeve designers. It's an absolute cliche, but it is the fact of the matter. And so in all of that, had kind of found the idea of creativity, but I wouldn't say I was like the classic person, And then the third component is I had two very out there art teachers at school who were pretty avant-garde and would like show you weird stuff and like, would really like, and they filled my brain with a lot of crazy stuff. And in doing that, I think that's where it was a combination of all those things together, which is why I think for me, branding works quite well, because it is like an understanding in the world, cultural significance, how all those things work, and then applying creativity to it rather than necessarily just the kind of pure art or design of it. I think, a lot of people end up in our industry and it's actually about their own creative expression. Now, obviously that is important, but for me, I'm much more interested in influencing culture and the way cultures come together, etc., etc. So yeah, kind of like a semi-creative. I also wanted to be a fighter pilot for a while, which is a bit weird now, and I'm one of those things I was really glad I didn't do, because my life would be very different.
That's because at school there used to be that test, and there was only like 5 jobs on it. You could be a fighter pilot, a doctor, a lawyer. There was like.
It's exactly that. I remember my that test came out for me as a leather technologist, and I was just like, "What is that? That's rubbish." And my careers teacher said, "Well, what do you want to be?" And I was like, about 15 or 16, and I went, "I want to be a graphic designer." And he went, "Well, no one's ever earned any money being a graphic designer." And I was like, right, okay.
It's funny how like a teacher can like really inspire or really kill something. Like I got a C in higher art, and my art teacher just didn't like me for some reason. They said, "You've got no idea about color. You'll never do anything creative." And I'm like, that could have killed every piece of creativity in you, if you're not careful. So
they don't realize their power in a way, do they?
Yeah, it's
crushing dreams left, right, and center.
Totally.
How do you keep a balance? Running a business can be quite a consuming thing. Like,
yeah, my best solution to keeping a balance so far is having a child. And then therefore you can't
forced balance.
Yeah, you like, it's forced balance.
Yeah.
Before I had a child, it was really hard. Yeah, and because it's enjoyable, and so therefore it's like, well, I can sit on the sofa and watch TV, which there isn't that much great TV in the world, or I can go and do the other thing which I really like doing, and is always there and always on. And when you're working around the world as well, it really is always on. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can quite often wake up to a lot of emails and like stuff that's happening, etc., etc. So that has been a big challenge and will continue to be a big challenge. But I think having my son recently has definitely been the thing where it's like you want to not be staring at your computer or a screen. You want to be engaging with him. But you have to detrain yourself, because there's definitely one thing I've learned in the last 12 months is I'm addicted to my smartphone. So I need to work quite heavily on that.
How old's your son?
He's 8 months. So.
8 months. Oh wow, you're right in the.
Yeah, I'm right at the start. Yeah,
that's the
feeling my age as well.
That first 6 months is really hard. The first year and a half's really hard. It gets easier after a year and a half, I promise.
That's good.
That kind of that smartphone addiction thing's quite interesting. It's like I think something probably we all struggle with now, and. You're constantly bombarded, like I sometimes feel really overwhelmed, and, me and Lewis have talked about that. Keenan here, who's filming. Hey, Keenan. But like, you're bombarded with stuff all the time, and it's quite difficult in today's world. And, almost like we're kind of part of the problem in terms of like we're creating a lot of that noise with the digital assets, with recording a podcast, right? This is picking up on someone's phone right now. That balance thing, very early on when I was creating Made Brave, and I decided at one point I'm not going to check emails after 6 o'clock at night, because as you know, running a business, you get a lot of good emails, you get a lot of challenging ones, right? And what I realized was that when you get a challenging email at night, suddenly you've read that's maybe ruined your family time, because you're thinking about that, you're consumed, you maybe don't sleep, and then you can't do anything about it till the next day. And I think there's something nice in leaving those, if you can turn that off at night and leave it till the morning, you can then action stuff. And I'm just interested, I suppose, anything you've found to help create that balance of family life and, understanding that kind of addiction to this stuff, and, any practical tips that you've got for managing balance. Or
I think, I'm not sure I've got anything good on practical tips. I think what you're talking there is something that I'm quite fascinated to, which is, there's a lot of stuff at the moment about turning your phone off, limiting your screen time, etc. And that's born of a good thought and a good idea, but I actually think what we need to do is have a bit more thought about what role technology is playing in our lives, and not this idea of bad technology, which I think is growing with people, which is like tech is bad. And it's like, well, it's not fundamentally, because it's done a load of amazing stuff, and access to information is incredible and has never been better. the connection that you can feel with people around the world, particularly for people that maybe live in isolated spaces or whatever, is awesome as well. I think for me, it's about understanding what role technology plays in our lives and being a bit more nuanced with it. So some basic stuff I've done is I've my exercise apps and my stuff that is about kind of like more positive stuff lives in a better place. Whereas, my Twitter addiction is less fed if it's slightly harder to find on my phone and it's got a limit on top of it, And that's not to say that Twitter's bad, because there's a lot of amazing stuff on Twitter, but it is very easy to get sucked down a hole and lose an hour, and before you know it, you're like, all I got was some people shouting about politics, and that was about it, which always seems to manage to find itself into your feed, however much you don't follow those people. So I think for me, that's going to be the big challenge of the 2020s, is understanding how technology plays. And, this, like we've done a reasonable amount of work in the travel space, and people being able to research, look for, find vacations, experiences, holidays online, I genuinely believe has led to a quality of holidays or time away never being higher. People are building amazing businesses all over the UK, Europe, America, where you can go and stay in amazing quirky little houses, some are in a tree, some people converting all this amazing stuff. That wouldn't have existed without the internet, because you would have had to market the hell out of that. Whereas now, all you need is the right reviewer, the right person to go there, good search algorithm, you can find it and stuff. And so I think, that's the kind of thing where digital, I think, is having a brilliant impact on our life. But we forget all that because we see the fact that our kids watched, 180,000 hours of Peppa Pig, and we have a breakdown about it because we're worried that they've watched so much Peppa Pig. So I think there's a bit more of a nuance that needs to come into it all a bit, and people need to think about it in a bit more of a clearer way. And for me, I think that piece is just going to grow and grow. I also think there's a big kind of branding component to that as well, which is like, how do we build the narrative around these products and these ideas that people are having? Because the genie isn't going back in the box.
Exactly, yeah.
I can watch my 8-month-old trying to pick my iPhone up, and he's already trying to work out how to unlock it, and that's literally, he can't speak yet, but he can do that. That is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It just seems to come natural to them.
They can just sit. So someone got the UX kid.
We've kind of been talking about it generally, but it'd be cool to hear about what I suppose trends and revolutions you can see happening. We're in a new decade, and you work with a lot of brands and probably think about this a lot.
So I think for me, one thing that's really definitely happening, which is really interesting, is I think there was a generation of stuff where we put things on the internet and it was amazing that it existed on the internet. That's not enough anymore. There was a time where I can search for a flight, or I can, get a bank account, or I can do these things, and it worked quite well. Whereas now, I think we're in this next trend, which is like, how do I acknowledge this existing within people's lives? How do I acknowledge all of the components of, like, how can I blend this information together? And so I think from a point of view on that front, I think a lot of the companies we work with are thinking about how that exists in that space. And so, we work with a company called Fat Llama, and I think the lazy way of explaining it is it's like Airbnb for stuff. So you can borrow people's stuff online. There's some amazing information out there in the world about the fact that, a drill gets used for 16 minutes a year. Yeah, a lot of people have just got one sat in their house. It's like, why can't we borrow our neighbours? How can we think about things in that kind of way? And so I think a trend we're going to see is, rather than the kind of last period we've had, which is, email and all of these things that existed, it'll be much more engaging and kind of like how this has impact in people's lives, what's it doing. And so I think the next wave of successful companies are going to have that real kind of story component sorted out, so you can really start about that, because there's no doubt the novelty's worn off. Everyone just completely takes it for granted. We go online, we do a thing, that's it. But also the world isn't quite talking about it in the right way. It's like, the media are obsessed with the death of the high street, but all of us could reach out to our family and friends and go, how do you do your Christmas shopping? And almost everybody would say majority online. Even people that are probably a bit more kind of Luddite-y, and even those that enjoy shopping still do lots of online shopping and stuff. So how we understand that change and the impact of it is going to be the big trend, I think. And I think branding's got a big part to play on that, because we are going to have empty city centres, and so we're going to have a bit of a think about what we're going to do with them for starters.
More pub.
More pubs, yeah. Yeah, more nights out.
You spoke at the beginning that a logo is part of a brand. It's not a whole brand. Now I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here just to ask you like kind of what your definition of brand is. It's quite a hard thing, and everyone kind of has a different way of seeing it. And a lot of our guests, have had quite interesting ways of putting it. I'm just interested, how you describe brand in today's world and what that means.
Going back to the idea that someone has always said it better than you, I'm going to go down that route, which is Jeff Bezos, which is kind of ironic because he hasn't got a very good brand, but he says that a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think that's a really nice definition for me.
I love that one. I use that all the time. I use that in all my talks.
And for me, I think it just sums it up. I think there's a secondary part to that, which is kind of comes from me a bit more, which is I think of as a brand as a moat, which is, anyone can copy your business. We could sit down now with some laptops and go, right, what we're going to do? We're going to do a shoe business. We need to get stock. We need to, build an e-commerce site, et cetera, et cetera. What makes people go to a certain place is the design of the shoes, the product. You think about it. And a brand is no different. I think, a lot of the brands that we work with might have similar services to other people. And so what we're trying to do is build that defendable territory around it, which makes something really stand out. So for me, I think like Airbnb, which myself and Joe were part of the Rebrand team in 2013, and then subsequently they work with us here as a client. I think if we get all the travel brands in the world and stick it on the wall, Airbnb really stands out. And that was our intent in 2013, and it still stands in 2020. And that is their defendable moat. That is what makes you go like, well, if I go on Airbnb, there'll be a lot kind of more experience. It'll be more rich. It'll be, it'll be so different in that way. And the brand is really communicating that with us. And so I think true uniqueness is hard because, let's be honest, most things have been done. But I think feeling unique in some component or some way is one of my driving forces when I think about what a brand is. Yep. And the logo is just the identifying component of that. I think there are great logos in the world, but they weren't necessarily all born great. They, over time, a lot of them have become great.
Yes, exactly.
And, I think there's a funny thing when we do a lot of naming as a company is that getting people to realize that the name wasn't necessarily brilliant on day one. If we're going to start a company that does kind of computers that are 4 times as much as other computers, I don't think we're going to call it Apple. I think, as a proposition on a bit of A4 paper in front of us, we'd be like, yeah, probably not the best name. It's not kind of getting the premium vibe. It's not delivering everything else. But, it's staring at me from your laptop over there, and it's great, and it's a great logo, and it works really well. And so for me, I think a brand is understanding that it is emotions, its values, its visual components, it's all those things. And I'm afraid for all the clients in the world, no, you can't measure it.
Yeah. Now we often talk as well about the kind of the logo part is much like a human. It's the face. It's the part that reminds you of all those other interactions.
Totally.
The experiences you've had with that person, their tone of voice, their personality, and all those other interactions. So no, I think that was a really nice definition. That moat. It's like that kind of. That keeps that distance from competitors, isn't it? It's like if our job as designers and brand experts is tell people what their brand is. It's trying to uncover it, isn't it? It's trying to figure out what's authentic to them and bring it to life for them. So they've got it as that that nice piece, and I think that's a really nice one. We always use Jeff Bezos. It's a good example.
It's a belter, isn't it?
It's a belter. Totally. We always ask this as kind of one of the last questions for, again, for the younger people listening. And, you're just starting into your 40s now, and, you've got a very successful agency, and, you'll be very inspiring to a lot of people, including us. And I suppose thinking back to young James and young James getting started in this industry, it can be a hard industry to get in, and you've got to do a lot of graft, you've got to do a lot of hard work. Is there some practical tips that you would give younger you or younger people listening?
Yeah, I had a bit of a hard start as well, whereas I got a really good internship to start off with, and then that kind of came to an end, and they were a younger company and they weren't really looking to hire anyone at that moment in time. And off the back of that, I had a bit of a wilderness year or two where I just didn't really manage to connect anywhere. And I think at that time there was where I reflect back on it, there was a few things that were happening. It was number one, the .com boom had just kind of been and gone, and so agencies were struggling a bit because a lot of agencies had come to the fore around that time, and there was a lot of stuff floating around, and in those agencies going under, which some big ones in London did go under, I think people were just a bit spooked, and so they went back to kind of like the what they know mode. I think for me, I had had gone through a degree which was good, but I struggled with probably being one of the stronger people at the degree to suddenly realizing that I was back to zero again. And until I got somewhere, I kind of like had to prove something on that front. And so I think my kind of number one advice is don't think about your portfolio or the work you're doing as a fixed asset. I think one of the mistakes I made is I came out of uni, I was like, these are my projects, I've got them, and I was kind of like walking the pavement, showing them to a lot of people. And I could have spent that 6 months actually making a lot of them better and thinking about them again.
Yep.
And I just thought about it as a fixed asset. I didn't, that's my uni work. That's what it looks like. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I spent, all that money getting it printed because in 2001 that's what you did. And
giant black folder.
Yeah, it wasn't quite. It was kind of like that big, but yeah, I found it the other day actually when I was looking for something. But I think I thought about it as a fixed asset, and I think especially now, 19 years later, it's not. You've got digital assets that you can amend and change, and thinking about it as a living, breathing thing which explains who you are. Because when you're a younger designer, your change that you feel is so much more manifest because you're, the day you leave uni versus 6 months later, you're probably so much more different than you are 6 months in your life once you're as old as me. And so I think that piece there is something to really think about. I think the other piece of advice I'd give myself back there is think about the kind of communication and the story around why you like the work you do, why you've done that. I think it's really easy just to accept your tutors or whoever you've talked to or other companies you've worked at or whatever, their single piece of advice, go, well, they've told me it, that must be it, it's the gospel, I'm going to go and activate against it. And we had some tutors that were very inspiring and very great, but were a little bit more old-fashioned. And so they were telling us how to put things together in a way that probably belonged in the 80s rather than the 2000s. And I think I didn't have a chance to compare with anyone else because I only had my own course. And so therefore I didn't really do my research to have a look and see how everyone else was doing everything. And I think I really feel that at the moment as a creative director at Koto is that obviously I get a lot of emails, a lot of stuff sent to us. You get some weird stuff like, not in this job, but my last job, someone turned up with a cake, gave me a cake, dressed up in a uniform. And I was like, what's this about? It's a cake. Where's this cake from? And then I got an email 5 minutes later and he goes, that's me. If you eat the cake, my portfolio's in the cake. And I was just like, Jesus.
We've had so many of those.
Yeah.
Like, I would believe we've had someone dress up as Alice in Wonderland. That appeared at the door, like the Mad Hatter, like totally with the whole outfit on. And we were like, oh my God, who is that at the door? And it was like someone had sent their husband dressed up as that, presenting the CV. Keenan here, actually, he had a great one for how he applied at Made Brave. Keenan sent in Krispy Kreme donuts. Krispy Kreme had just landed in Glasgow at the time, and under every single donut was something about Keenan. And it worked, didn't it? It's a good one. It's a good one.
So I think for me, a lot of that stuff probably distracted me at that time as I was too busy thinking about the form rather than how I kind of like actually connect with people and think about what they need or what they want from me. And so I think that stuff is what is all super important. But also, don't just carpet bomb everyone with exactly the same thing because it's really obvious that you've made this absolute carpet bomb and you're just like trying the numbers game and you're sending 200 people exactly the same piece of communication.
So do you like that creative application?
I think I prefer just to let the work speak for itself. I think, we have amazing digital tools at our hands. You can make a really great presentation in Google Slides. You can send me a very short email that to the point talks to me about you. You don't need to tell me which of our projects you love. I know our own projects inside out, and I'm very happy you went on our website and had a look at that and wrote some notes about it. But don't put it in my email because the biggest issue in my life is time.
Yeah,
I don't, and it's this. I'm not on my own. It's everyone's lives, and so therefore I don't have all day to read 300-word emails that have got an in-depth.
That's a big thing, isn't it? It's like keep it succinct. It's that's a really good tip, I suppose, from all of us. Is like keep it small and don't. I think if you apply for a studio, often we get hundreds of these emails every day, and don't let it put off if someone doesn't get back to you. Because if you just keep trying, it might be the 10th, the 11th, the 12th time that it lands on the right day.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a thing that I was reading yesterday, which someone had said that the best way to do an email is a 9-word email. I think there's a really reductive approach in that, which is, it might be a really hard challenge, but and it doesn't have to be 9 words, but if you take the idea and then deliver in that kind of way, I think that's the best thing. But yeah, to your point, you got to keep trying. I think the good side of it is never been a bigger need for creativity, whether you're a pure designer, whether you're motion, whether you're digital, whatever. You know, brands have got design teams that are so much bigger than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of great brands, and so therefore doesn't have to be a studio. You can work, you know, if there's a tech company you absolutely love, go and work there, because God knows they'll have some amazing projects as well. And so think about it in much more of a fluid way, I think, on that front.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, James. Thanks to everyone for listening. Real quick before we go, we just want to give a shout out to _SJ Ward _ who rated us recently and wrote a review. They said, I'm currently taking my graphic design degree, and the podcast turns to many aspects in the creative field, and it's a great listen when I'm doing my work. Also makes me want to try and do more creative work. Great work. Smiley face. So that's what we'd like to hear. So thanks for listening. You know, we'd love more reviews. Help us get the word out. Please rate us and review us. And you know, SJ Ward, please, best of luck with your degree. It's not easy, but you'll get there. If anyone has any questions for me or Lewis, make sure and ask us on social. You can also ask us any questions for any of our guests, or recommend any guests that you'd like to see on the show. If you like what you're hearing, as I mentioned, and you want to support us, please rate us, write a review, and help us get the word out. If you've been listening to the podcast on Google or Spotify, you can also watch the full version on YouTube. We publish a new episode on the last Monday of every month, so make sure you are subscribed, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.